You could not live with your own failure. Where did that bring you? Back to me.
Mualani is the brand new Hydro 5-star catalyst that arrived with Genshin Impact for version 5.0. In this video, I'm going to go over the results of my testing with 42 of Mualani's team. And yes, 90% of them have Xiangling, but it's not for lack of trying. I tested Mualani with every single character I could possibly think of. And we're going to talk about where she's strong, where she's weak, what her best 4-star and 5-star teammates are, and talk about whether or not you should get her, and how to make the most out of her if you do. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. A very quick summary of her kit. Her skill allows her to tag enemies. Every time she tags an enemy, she builds a stack. When she has 3 stacks, you press her normal attack to deal her max damage. At least for me, the max that I could get was 3 fully stacked normal attack, which is not very many hits. Fortunately, each of these normal attacks can be vaporized, meaning you'll deal a lot of damage with each hit if you build your teams correctly. Her burst is basically a single nuke that is not quite as powerful as a fully charged normal attack, but it's still very, very important for your levels as it does a very sizable amount of damage. Her first passive is actually very important as it's what extends her skill's state, the Night Soul Blessing state that all Natlan characters have. This is what allows it to last long enough to actually get 3 fully charged bites off. It's also a bit of a nuisance because if for some reason the puffer's RNG because of enemy RNG makes it so that they don't come back to you in time, her skill can end prematurely, which will mean most likely a reset or just a slower clear. So it doesn't really contribute much to her kit other than giving her a bit of inconsistency, but I only found this happen to me maybe 1 in 20 Abyss runs, so normally it's not a huge deal. Her second passive gives her more burst damage when you have more essentially Natlan characters on her team. Currently, she can get a max of 1 stack with Kachina, and Kachina isn't really an ideal partner for Mualani, although there are definitely some teams that work very well for her. I don't think this will be a massive improvement in the future, but I do imagine lots of future characters will help her quite a bit and just improve her teams overall, so this will be a nice bonus for additional burst damage once those Natlan characters come out. Her last 2 passives are both exploration passives. This one gives her a much longer skill state in Natlan when she picks up random things in Natlan and just allow her to use the phlogiston, the special Natlan fire, to have a longer skill duration, which makes her absolutely incredible to use in the overworld. In Natlan, she is unbelievable for overworld. If you're an overworld main, Mualani is almost basically a must pull and will remain so until you're done exploring Natlan. You're going to absolutely want to make sure you 90 her. Very, very important as an HP scaler. She gets a ton of value from being taken to level 90s. If you're going to main Mualani, I highly recommend you crown her skill. Very, very important. I think level 9 burst is fine. I will crown her because I really like Mualani. It potentially could be more worth it to crown her burst when it does more damage, when we have more Natlan characters in the party. As a pure damage dealer, every amount of damage you have is great, and if you can finish off a wave with just her burst, that's huge. So extra levels, you know, it obviously has really good scaling, and you get a pretty solid 5%. So I don't know, I'm gonna crown it, but I think you can leave it at level 10 and just crown her skill. Obviously, if you're newer or you're strapped on resources, leaving it at a lower level is totally fine. Just focus on her skill over her burst and always ignore her normal. For artifact sets, you will absolutely want to use the Obsidian Codex. It gives her an absolutely ridiculous amount of stats, both in damage bonus and in 40 crit rate. And due to her crit rate ascension, that will greatly affect how you build her. It'll mean you definitely need a crit damage headpiece and lots of crit damage rolls. It also restricts kind of the weapons that you choose. So if you're using like the battle pass weapon and you already have like a really good Heart of Depth set, where is it? This one, you could potentially go with a Heart of Depth, but I really recommend just farming the new set because it is a really, really big difference for her. You got to go with an HP Sands. You could go with Elemental Mastery if you're lacking Elemental Mastery substats and teammates that buff it. You want to go with a Hydro Damage bonus goblet unless you're like me and you don't have one, and you'll have to go with HP. You could also go with EM. And then for the hat, you definitely want to go crit damage. Crit rate, you're going to overcap on crit rate, so go with crit damage. You could technically potentially go with an HP or EM, but it's going to be worse for most people. And for substats, you're looking for HP, EM, and crit rate and crit damage. So kind of like Xiangling in the way that it's maybe a bit easier to build her than building a lot of DPSs, because all of those stats are really, really valuable. And so if you can get substat rolls, maybe they miss your crit, but you hit your HP, it's really still good. And because, especially if you're using a weapon with high crit damage like Widsith or her signature, then you don't need as much crit damage on substats to get good value from all of your rolls. For breakpoints, I definitely recommend at least 100 to 150, if not more EM. All EM is good. There's not really a breakpoint for HP. You just want lots of HP. You do want to use her burst. It is important. I found that I always had her burst, or almost always had her burst off cooldown with 106 ER. There could be some teams where you really don't generate any energy. You don't really want to build energy recharge if it cuts into your damage, but if you have a bit of energy recharge, that's sort of ideal just to make sure you get the burst off. It's not super integral to the kit, but it does a really good amount of damage, and doing an extra instance of damage is very, very important. Just so you can see what I was working with, I don't quite have 200 crit value here, but because her weapon gives her so much crit and I have like a decent amount of crit on my substats, I ended up with a pretty, like it's a pretty decent looking artifact set, and I also have some HP rolls, some EM rolls. So overall, I would say my artifact set is really good, except for the fact that it's an HP goblet instead of a hydro. I just don't have anything. I just don't have any hydro, and I haven't been able to farm for the crafting artifact thingy yet. So overall, my artifact set is quite good, but there's still room for improvement with a hydro goblet. For weapons, obviously her signature is overall the best, but actually the Widsith, when you get the damage bonus stat, is actually her best in slot weapon, but you're only going to get that once every 3 runs, meaning that you either have to reset 3 times, and because Mualani is already a reset heavy character, this is probably going to be very, very frustrating to do, but it is nice in the fact that she also uses the EM. 480 EM is an absolutely bonkers amount, and it still is pretty close to her signature with the EM buff. Obviously, the attack buff is completely useless. It's still fine as a stat stick, I guess, if you get the attack buff and you don't want to reset, but if you're actually going for a reasonable clear, the attack buff is going to be a reset, so 2 out of 3 times. It's not awful. I still definitely recommend this as the go-to 4-star option for most players. Widsith, number 2, the craftable catalyst, number 3, and the event catalyst. There's no reason to ever go for the event catalyst because the craftable one is better. Prototype amber, also, it's kind of good, I guess, but it's worse than the craftable. The only pro I can see with prototype amber is if you're using a healerless Furina team and you already have one rank 5, then maybe that could do something, but no. These are really the 3. Yeah, technically, Tome of Eternal Flow, not too bad because it gives 16% HP and lots of crit damage, and Sacrificial Jade is incredible for her, especially with high refinements, but you're going to overcap on crit rate almost immediately, so in practice, it's probably not going to be much better than this, but it depends on your artifacts. If you get good enough artifacts, then it is technically very close to her signature and Widsith. She does have a bunch of problems, and I wrote them here so I wouldn't forget them. She has a mechanic that I forgot to talk about in the mechanic session, whereas when you tag enemies, she does damage to the one that you hit, and then she does secondary like pufferfish explosion damage to the enemies that you tagged but didn't hit with the final bite, because she can only hit one enemy with the final bite. This does give her good AoE, very good AoE in fact, but sometimes the skill explosion just misses. I don't know if it misses when the enemy just moves too fast or if something else was blocking it, but it just feels like sometimes the skill explosion misses and it just doesn't work. That is really annoying. It doesn't happen super often, but when it happens, it's really annoying. It was the worst against the perpetual mechanical array spawns. That boss is horrible for testing Mualani. She can get a great clear against it. We got a tie for my best clear against the perpetual mechanical array, but it was annoying, and sometimes she targets one of the perpetual mechanical array spawned enemies that doesn't actually take damage, and then you end up missing the other one even if you tagged it, and then they block your pufferfish so that the pufferfish don't even hit it, and it is just the most ridiculous thing ever. Genshin, fix your auto targeting. It is absolutely insane. This should be a bug that they should fix. I hope that they're watching this and they can fix it. I think I deleted all my bad clears, so I don't have footage of that, but it is really, really annoying. Please fix it. Pufferfish has other issues in that sometimes she doesn't pick up the puffer. So this is different than the pufferfish explosion. This is the one that extends her skill duration. Sometimes she just doesn't pick it up, and so her skill ends early. Again, normally this is when the enemy moves around a lot or something blocks it. Zhongli's pillar can block the pufferfish. It's very frustrating, but it only happens sometimes. So often you can just reset, but Mualani is a character that has another con that is, if she misses her crit, she loses a huge amount of damage. So you do really want a high crit rate. I do have a total of 92 crit rate here, but missing a crit is basically a reset. I felt like her burst didn't crit or it missed pretty often, especially with the perpetual mechanical ray flying up and down. It's like a projectile, and sometimes it flies around and hits really late. Sometimes it hits really soon. Sometimes it just misses and goes to the wall. That's very frustrating. So none of these issues would be that big on their own, but because any of them can happen in any given moment, it just makes it annoying to play her. If you're the type of person that's on the fence for Mualani and you're annoyed by random things messing with your clears, this is a really big problem. If you're a Mualani lover and you don't care about, you know, resetting for your favorite character, this stuff is a nuisance because you can work around it by resetting, but it's still a really big pain. She doesn't have energy issues herself, but a good majority of her team members have energy issues with between Xiangling and Candace, and mostly Xiangling. Like it's always Xiangling, and that just makes, sometimes if you kill waves too fast, you start a new chamber, you don't have energy, blah blah blah, super annoying. This isn't a problem with her. It'll get fixed with more teammates, but since most of her teammates have this issue, it's kind of a problem. There's also a bit of cooldown issues with lots of her teammates not lining up on cooldown, especially Xiangling. And that brings us to the final problem, which is Xiangling. Almost all of her teams have Xiangling. I'm so sorry. Let's go into teams. Before we go into teams, however, let's talk about her pros. She has good DPS. Her DPS is quite good. I'll talk about where I think she fits versus others and in the meta after the team section, but I think her overall DPS is very good. Definitely one of the better characters overall. You do have to reset, probably, to get these clears, especially if you have the Witsith. I'll add that to the cons as well, but she does good damage. I'm definitely satisfied with her damage. Definitely one of the better DPSs for damage. She has a decent amount of teams. I'm not gonna say it's a lot because most of them have Xiangling. It's gonna feel a lot better after we get more Natlan characters, but I think that with the 5-star standard selector, as long as you didn't jump the gun and just pick a character, everyone should have an option, even a 4-star option with one 5-star standard unit, to make a good team with Mualani. No one should struggle to make at least one good team of Mualani. I guess I'll put amount free-to-play team. Obviously, all her good teams are Vape, although I did try some others. But, you know, it's decent. It's not like she only has one team that feels good. There's a bunch of teams that feel solid. She has good AoE and single target. I think this is definitely a pro. Her ability to tag multiple enemies is really, really nice. Oh, another weakness is mobile or multi-wave enemies. Now, it's kind of, mobile and multi-wave enemies are kind of hard because they're not a total weakness. Like, she has disadvantages and advantages. On one, it can waste your skill time to chase after mobile enemies. But on the other hand, if you've already tagged them, it's fine if they moved away because they'll still get hit by damage. And her skill really sends her quite far, so if they move away after you've tagged them and then you attack, yeah, you'll rush towards one of them and still do damage, and you'll still deal damage to the others. So it's a downside that it can waste your time, but it's also, she sort of has a solution built in that's not too bad. And multi-wave, if you just barely don't kill an enemy and you don't have any sub DPSs, and she's like just the hyper carry, big hyper buff DPS, multi-wave can be really rough if you just barely don't kill an enemy and then you have to waste one of your skills on the next one of your big charged bites on the next one. So multi-wave can be a pain, but if you can one-shot the multi-wave, then it's pretty good. But yeah. Good AoE and single target. Big screenshot is fun, which is nice. She also has a lot better interruption resistance than I thought. I almost never felt myself being staggered. For a second, I thought she had like almost infinite interruption resistance, but no, there's certain heavy attacks that do knock her out. But I just found that the majority of the time, and this wasn't like super non-aggressive, but I found once she was in her skill state, she didn't really get knocked around very much. Certainly not nearly as much as, for example, Nevullette gets knocked around. The perpetual mechanical array didn't knock me around at all. A lot of the ROAs didn't knock me around at all. Even when I was using healerless, shielderless teams, it was kind of better than I thought. And I don't know if this is just because I had HP Goblet, but she felt pretty tanky as well. I also think she has very, like, extremely high future potential, like some of the highest future potential I've ever seen, because one of her biggest weaknesses, again, is Xiangling. Both because of the burst cost, but also the cooldown. She'd be able to do shorter rotations if we had another character. This is a big theme for Xiangling. So many characters get screwed over by the longer rotations between Raiden and Clorand and Chevre's teams. I mean, it's basically every Xiangling team, really. Like, every team could do shorter rotation pretty much if you had someone else other than Xiangling. And shorter rotations means you can start doing more skills like 2 seconds sooner potentially, which means that a shorter rotation Xiangling would be massive for Mualani. Plus obviously the Natlan bonus to her burst. All in all, I think she has extremely high future potential. I wouldn't pull her thinking she's going to be the best DPS in the game because of all this future potential. But if you're pulling her anyways, it's nice to know that it's really, really likely that she will be getting a buff with Natlan characters. One final grievance to mention is if you have ping on the higher side, mine is 105. Sometimes if I use her 3rd stack bite immediately after receiving a 3rd stack, sometimes it will register as only a 2nd stack bite. And I think the more ping you have, the more annoying this issue will be, which might mean you have to delay. I think no matter what ping you have, you'll always be able to get 3 fully charged bites because there is some leeway, but it might make it more tricky. It might make it more difficult, especially with mobile enemies, and give you less leeway. So it is super annoying. I wish Genshin would do more for the higher ping players, but unfortunately it is what it is. On top of that, another note I would just like to mention for all the clears when we're testing against the PMA, you have to look not only at the time to end the first phase instead of just the total clear time, because there's a lot of RNG overall, but also how many bites, how many crit vape bites it takes Mualani to down the PMA, because some teams will be able to crit vape the burst and 2 bites and the PMA is fully down, and some will need a partial 3rd bite or whatever. It's still very impressive. It's very impressive damage, but if you find yourself comparing some of the clears for the different Mualani teams, just keep all of this in mind, that the PMA is not a great boss to test, but it's all we have, unfortunately. Well, let's talk about current characters. What are her teams right now? Why did I test 42 of them? I don't know, but I did. Let's talk about my misery. The go-to general recommendation, if you have all the characters at your disposal and you just want the simplest, comfy team to get you up and running, that will also deal great damage, it's going to be this one: Zhongli, Emilie, Xiangling. Zhongli provides, obviously, interruption resistance, which, like I said, isn't as important as I thought, but it's still very, very nice, very, very comfy. He can use the new artifact set to buff Mualani, or using Archaic Petra. Archaic Petra gives a bigger buff, but the new artifact set is less cringe. Either way, you're only going to have it for the first rotation, because after that you won't have Hydro really applied to the enemies unless you can apply it with Mualani's normal attack for a new wave. That's how you're going to apply Hydro for Zhongli to crystallize. Emilie's here to deal obviously lots of damage and keep up the pyro aura with burning, which makes the pyro aura a little bit more consistent, and Xiangling as our reliable pyro applicator. She is unfortunately the only reliable pyro applicator we have in the game, and even though Mualani does not require that much pyro to vape, because not very many pyro characters apply in a very nice AoE, and Mualani's actually quite solid in AoE, you're gonna miss a lot of vapes if you don't have someone like Xiangling. And even with Xiangling, you know, she's not perfect, so she can't keep up with all the teams that you would like to run. And also she does some damage, at least. Like, it's not a huge amount of damage without Bennett, without buffs and stuff like that, but at least you're doing some damage, and other pyros just don't keep up the same way. So because of the inconsistency of other characters, this is my go-to team. Now, if you're feeling spicy, I have cooked up something amazing, and that is this delicious no healer team. This is the team that I was able to get the best clears on, and if you happen to get C1 Mona, it will get even better, which I only have C0. But you're basically trading Zhongli's resistance shred, which is really good in this team, by the way, shredding both Emilie's and Mualani's and Xiangling's resistance. But Mona gives a really big damage bonus to Mualani, and as a result, this is the highest damaging team. You're gonna put Mona on Prototype Amber. Prototype Amber helps her with her energy regeneration and gives a tiny little heal for the team for any damage you might take. I realize that my Mualani could be a little bit tankier, and this could be a little easier to pull off because I'm using an HP Goblet. Maybe you want to try an HP Goblet if you're running this team. I don't know. My HP Goblet happens to be better, especially if you do use the Widsith on the elemental damage bonus. I don't know. But I actually found that the healing with Prototype Amber was perfectly fine on this team. I find Mualani a pretty mobile character. You can often move out of the way of enemies so they don't hit you. As you're tagging them, you can go through enemies pretty easily. If you know their attack patterns, you can often move out of the way, similar to how you can move out of the way with Nevullette. But at the end of the day, this is a healerless and shielderless teams. I find it more comfy to play than a lot of healerless and shielderless teams, but it's still not a total walk in the park. You'll want Mona to not use her skill on this team, which is a bit Grim. Her skill will apply too much hydro and ruin your vapes. So you'll need to build a ton of ER on Mona. And I have obviously Xiangling on Fav. My Xiangling, by the way, has a pretty insane 240 for energy recharge, and I would get more if I could. That's basically all you worry about on this team. I'm using the power damage goblet that I have with the most ER, the circlet I have with the most ER, the flower I have with the most ER, the feather I have with the most ER, and then an ER sand. So I'm just building ER Xiangling on the ER, and her, you know, her stat line is, I don't really care about it, and I'm using it on Fav for the most ER. And then Emily's just built for damage as usual. If you don't have Emilie, you can switch this out for Nahida. You could put them both on Prototype Amber if you want. You could have 3 Prototype Ambers on this team. Don't do that. But Nahida is a solid alternative to Emilie. She does less damage, but she buffs Mualani with her Elemental Mastery buff in her burst, which is very, very good. I generally would run Nahida on Fav for this team. Got some really nice clears as well. Not as good as the Emilie, but still very awesome. You also don't get the burning resistance from Nahida the way you do from Emilie, so you're a bit more liable to die on this team. You are not more liable to die with the Baizhu variant, however. Baizhu brings what we love about the Dendro, but also gives us extra interruption, lots of healing, a little bit of reaction buff, but that's just for Dendro reactions for Xiangling, so that doesn't really matter. And again, because Mona doesn't apply too much hydro, she's pretty solid here, but you can also switch her out for Furina. And this team I would have put on one of the highest lists, but sometimes you just, often you'll just miss your vape. Oftentimes Furina will vape instead of Mualani, and Xiangling won't be able to reapply Pyro in time for Mualani to vape again. Because there isn't usually too much leeway, you just miss a vape, and that really sucks. It really, really sucked to miss a vape. You lose an absolute ton of damage. It sucks to miss a vape. So although I do recommend this team, and I do think it's good, it is a bit of a reset impact. Kachina, you can use Kachina here. This is with the Mona. So you normal attack with Mualani, use whatever with Kachina to get a Geo reaction, use Xiangling, then use Mona. Again, you don't use Mona's skill. Kachina provides a very, very big buff. A very big buff with her new artifact set. It also buffs Mualani's burst a little bit. You get a bit of crystallize, which gives you some survivability. I don't know what they'll do with future Geo characters, if they'll ever make an off-field Geo healer. Maybe that they do sub DPS damage, or they do buffing or something like that. But if they ever did something like that, then this team would be kind of cracked, in my opinion. You're still gonna maybe struggle to get some vapes. It might have that Baizhu problem, might be even worse. Unclear. But if you can get those 3 vapes, this is going to deal massive. Staying on the Kachina train though, using double Geo with Chiori was pretty awesome. I liked this a lot, actually. I really hope that Xilonen does a construct so that she can work with Chiori, because this team would actually be cracked if Xilonen could fit on a double Geo and count as a construct. It might even be too good, because this team is already one of the better teams. It was also very, very comfy because you get a lot of crystallizes with double Geo. Kachina Chiori is like basically a defensive core. You get so many crystallizes, especially for interruption resistance. Versus the dogs, a little bit sus because you need actually some healing because of the corrosion, but against all other enemies except for the corrosive dog, very, very tanky. By the way, I know some of you might get tired of me talking through every single team. I'll try and timestamp them individually so that you can skip to the exact team you want, which is gonna be a lot of work for me, but I know it'll be good for you guys. I just found it really confusing looking at pre-release guides and having everyone talk about all the different teammates, but not talking about how they all work together. So this is how I would like to see a video done. Let me know if you find it too much and you'd rather me just talk about the characters. This one, did I already talk about this? Zhongli, Xiangling, Mona? I don't know. This one was really good too. Another good mix of comfy and damage. Again, you can't use Mona's skill. Sucrose, Candace, Xiangling. So you swap out Mona, who makes it really weird for getting swirls for Candace. So the rotation here, and I do have C6 Candace. I didn't find it ruined my vapes. But what you basically want to do is start with Candace, go to Xiangling, apply Pyro. You will apply Pyro, but switching to Sucrose with Candace will activate her ability that applies Hydro when you switch, and it will apply Hydro to the enemy. Sucrose can swirl the Hydro, and it doesn't really matter if you swirl Pyro or not, because Xiangling doesn't do that much damage anyways, and then Mualani can go to town. So that's this team. Candace also gives a normal attack buff to Mualani. This team is pretty good. It wasn't crazy. It got big screenshots. It was really annoying to start new waves. The vape was really bad in multi-wave, obviously, because other teams, she can just kill multiple waves in one rotation with one hit per wave. Not the case with VV Vape. as lots of the damage is tied to the vape. You do get some crazy numbers though, like crazy. Like I was saying 430,000 damage or something like with her skill. Is crazy number. But I think it's a bit jank, so maybe I wouldn't even put it in teams I like. I'd put it in, I don't know if I'd put it in issues or okay. I guess it's issues. Yeah, this is just my opinion, right? Do what you want. Emilie, Nahida, Xiangling. Again, healerless, you're going Nahida on Prototype Amber for some heals, and you're getting an EM buff from Nahida as well as the Dendro Resonance. There's nothing to mess with your Pyro application. You always want to use, as with every team, you always want to use Xiangling last in the rotation if you can, basically with Mona being the only exception, or maybe Animo being the only exception. Yeah, lots of damage, quite good. All right, bet you didn't expect this. Healerless Furina team, or maybe not totally healerless, because again, you're running Nahida on Prototype Amber, and if you need extra healing, like the dot, like versus the dogs, or you're getting hit, then you switch to healer mode for Furina. You lose a bit of personal damage, but it's not a big deal because you're going to get more fanfare stack. If you happen to have C1 Furina, then all Furina teams get a massive buff because you get much more fanfare. This team was actually pretty good, very good. I got great damage, great clears with this team. Pretty consistent for the vapes, but again, a bit inconsistent with survivability if you have skill issue. This was one of the teams that I tried cooking, and without Prototype Amber, it really cooks for the first rotation, and then after that, you have to switch. You have to alternate switching Furina to healing mode and normal mode, probably, unless you get some healing abyss cards. Which can make it really cringe. So I don't necessarily recommend it unless you have constellations. Obviously you can do Sucrose instead of Kazuha here, but I did get some insane first rotation clears. So if you specifically against the PMA, you can also get some healing during the PMA's downtime. And the nice thing about when Furina's in healing mode, she's not applying hydro, so you're getting more consistent vapes, and the vapes are boosted by Kazuha's swirl, or Sucrose's swirl. So overall, has some issues, still good though. Kachina, Candace, Xiangling, similar story. It's very good. And this is I like this because this is very free to play friendly. The survivability, it takes a hit for sure. Again, if we could get some survivability on a Geo Natlan character that can proc that artifact set. The nice thing about this one is that Candace doesn't apply as much hydro as Furina, so you get more consistent vapes, even though the buffing isn't as strong. And it's another Candace team that's good. So that's really cool. And yeah, Kachina's buff is just cracked here, so I like it. Speaking of characters that we all want to be buffed, Dehya is pretty good on this team instead of Zhongli or Baizhu as a defensive slot. I don't prefer using Dehya as the pyro applicator solo. I much prefer her as a defensive option. You can do a similar thing that I've been talking about, whereas you start with a Mualani normal attack, then use Dehya on the new set like next, and then she buffs Mualani, but only for the first rotation. But fortunately, first rotation is enough to kill most enemies, so it's fine. And Emilie and Xiangling doing a lot of sub DPS damage, very good. Switching out Emilie for Nahida hurts a little bit, but it's still good. Especially you needed a very well invested Mualani to make this trade worth it, because Emilie's damage is really significant, but this team is still excellent. You can also replace Dehya for banner character Xinyan, and you can do Xinyan Nahida or Xinyan Emilie. I do not like Xinyan as solo pyro, but having the secondary pyro is more consistent, especially in AoE. As usual, I do slightly prefer Emilie to Nahida, but both are good. Another Yelan variant with Kachina. I like this one a bit better than the other Yelan because at least you have some defensive utility with Kachina Crystallize, and you have more consistent Kachina Geo. You have more consistent uptime on Kachina's buff with the new artifact set. Pretty similar to the Candace one. I do kind of prefer the Candace one, I think, but this is fine as well. And then we already talked about the double Geo, which again, if you have Chiori, I highly recommend giving that a try. Really. Only had trouble with the dogs, otherwise amazing. Yelan, Sucrose, Xiangling. I felt like a true pro gamer with this one, because you just I mean, not really, but you use Yelan, then Xiangling, and then you just normal attack with Sucrose to spoil the hydro. That's pretty nice. And then Mualani, and then Yelan doesn't steal any vapes from Mualani. You get VV vape. If you use a skill, you're sometimes going to get a pyro swirl as well, so you're getting a double swirl. Sucrose EM buff. Team's pretty good, but again, it has issues like most of the VVV teams. I just found it pretty inconsistent, pretty annoying to execute, pretty hard to execute. It's the same thing to use Kazuha. This one maybe was even more inconsistent. What I did like about Kazuha in this case was that you can use Kazuha's burst after using the normal attack skill, and that will usually infuse with pyro, which means you get even more consistent vape, which is cool. But overall, it's part of the issue team. I had issues. I just prefer not doing VV vape. I just think it's too cringe. It's okay for if you just have one big enemy, that's okay. is just when you start actually fighting the enemy with multiple phases, like the PMA or multi-wave, it's just like, oh god, the multi-wave is so... The multi-wave just kills it. Multi-wave just kills VV Vape. In non-multi-wave scenarios, I could see either the Yelan one or the Candace one. This one, it just feels so cool to play, because when you switch to Kazuha, Candace will activate. It's just so annoying. I don't know why I tried this, but I tried like normal attack Mualani, then Sucrose to swirl, then set up Emilie and Xiangling. You basically only get one vaped burst and one vaped normal attack, and that's it. Does a lot of damage, but it's very inconsistent and just not worth using overall. Candace Baizhu Xiangling just didn't have the damage compared to the Furina variant, especially. A bit more consistent, but less damage. I felt it wasn't really worth it to lose that much damage. And then we already talked about Kachina, Candace, and Xiangling. I don't know why I put that in issue, whereas I put Yelan Kachina higher. Normally I like Candace more than Yelan, so I don't know exactly what I was thinking. Speaking of okay, oh, you guys are gonna love this. Nahida Furina Kuki. This is Mualani Hyperbloom. And Furina, hey, Furina's buffing Mualani. Between Nahida on Prototype Amber and Kuki healing, you're getting lots of heals, and overall, at least Mualani is not completely unbuffed since you have Furina. It was fine. It was fine. Mualani does good raw damage, and Furina is good at buffing, and Hyperblooms do damage. So it's bad, but fine. Yeah. We played Mualani Taser with Yoimiya, Furina Jean. I thought it was pretty good, pretty okay, anyways. Not recommended at all over Vape, especially since all the EM rolls that you probably have for Vape are now useless, and if you have her signature, that's now pretty much useless. Trading Yoimiya for Fischl, technically Yoimiya should be a little bit better, but maybe it's the field time, maybe it's something else, but I got slightly faster clears with Fischl, so yeah, these are fine. Maybe if you're like want to use them against Simon or something and you want to tech in an Electro, these are an option for you. Maybe I could see that, or like certain Imaginarium Theater restrictions maybe cause you to not be able to play Hydro and Pyro together. So that's where you want to keep these types of teams in your back pocket for. But I thought both of them can clear. Both of them are fine. A weird one, but not Taser. I tried like Xiangling, Furina, Jean. Teams I tried that were not my jam are these ones here. Basically, they're all the ones that don't use Xiangling as a pyro applicator or are just really cope for one reason or another. These all go here. I'm just realizing now I forgot to test Thoma in place of Dehya or Xinyan as the secondary pyro applicator. So we're gonna go do that right now. So yeah, very similar to Xinyan and Dehya, Thoma is a solid defensive option in secondary pyro. He gives a bit of a normal attack bonus. I actually think I prefer him maybe to both Xinyan and Dehya because number one, he provides more energy than Dehya to Xiangling, which is quite nice, or at least more immediate energy, which yeah is just quite nice. He can also do Fav instead of Sac, where Dehya has to run Sacrificial Sword to keep the short cooldown, whereas Thoma can do Fav and again provide more energy, which Xinyan can do as well, but Thoma provides the normal attack bonus. So I actually kind of like Thoma more than Dehya and Xinyan, but still less than Zhongli because Zhongli just provides more damage overall. But yeah, Thoma actually a good option. He definitely belongs up here, and none of these are not ranked, by the way. So any of the places you see Dehya or Xinyan, you can substitute for Thoma. But Thoma solo pyro is still tragically bad. Same with solo pyro Dehya. There was, oh yeah, Emilie Sucrose Dehya. Sorry, I talked about this earlier, but I did it wrong. You're supposed to normal attack with Mualani, do a single Dehya E skill, not the second half, just the first half. Then you swirl with Sucrose, and you get a double swirl. Mostly, only the Hydro swirl is important. And then you use Emilie, and then go to town with Mualani. In theory, very cool. In practice, very inconsistent. I hated it a lot. Like it did great damage the first rotation, like amazing. But I found that sometimes even the Dendro aura overtook. Multi-wave was horrendous and AoE was horrendous. So don't recommend it overall. Sorry. I wish Emilie was pyro. And yeah, same with Nahida instead of Emilie. Not a fan. Even worse, to be honest. Traditional Hydro with Furina, Yelan, and Jean was just a no. Not enough normal attacks for Yelan to be good. And I tried doing the Nevullette thing where you replace Yelan with Lisa, and I just like Fischl. Just use that. So, speaking of Nevullette, how does she compare to the other great DPSs in the game? I'm gonna say it's complicated. So, versus Nevullette, currently speaking, Nevullette is definitely just a much better unit overall. In terms of pure damage, definitely like Mualani can reach the same clears as Nevullette. Even in AoE, depending on how spread out the enemies are. If the enemies are really spread out, obviously Nevullette will reign supreme, but if not, then Mualani can actually out-clear Nevullette, both in single target and in AoE. In practice, it takes a lot more resets for Mualani to achieve the same clears that Nevullette can get on your first attempt. My first attempt to run with Nevullette was my best run for quite a few attempts, and I realized that they're all pretty much the same, so pretty much got it in the first attempt, whereas Mualani often took me 3, 4, 5 attempts to get everything right. Now, of course, this is brand new character. This is tricky vape. This is really cringe Abyss. I will say versus the next Abyss, which I played in the creator experience server, was so much easier with Mualani. Mualani felt like a dream to play in that Abyss. No problems at all with quality of life. I'm really glad that actually I couldn't release my other video on that Abyss, because this Abyss highlights her faults much more clearly. So that actually kind of worked out. But even despite those faults, she can hit really high highs and compete with Nevullette and even Arlecchino. She's kind of a lot like Arlecchino in the way that overall Arlecchino can outperform Nevullette and get better clears, but at the end of the day, Nevulette's quality of life is just way too insane and still can get very, very comparable clears with less effort. And yeah. Arlecchino, I would say, is sort of a bit better than Mualani overall still in terms of just overall, because her clears again are more consistent. She still has insane clears and setups. Still a cringe VV Vape stuff is still cringe, but she has solid other good comfy teams and just isn't quite as reset impact as Mualani. And then Alhaitham is just sort of like a baseline placeholder for me for like all the other good DPSs. I would put Mualani with all the other good DPSs, and that would include Alhaitham, Chlorand. I know people still meme on me for the Chlorand take, and you guys gotta get with the times. Chlorand is good, but it's fine. Linny, I would say if anyone is the most similar to Mualani, it's actually Linny, because Linny also has some of the fastest clears in the game, but he's also very cringe and very reset impact to play. The difference is with Linny, his resets, for me anyways, are more frustrating than the resets with Mualani, just because getting knocked around with Linny is so ridiculous and horrible. Playing a shielderless team with Linny, for me, is way worse, infinitely worse than playing a shielderless teams with Mualani. But I think that even then, Linny has higher ceilings. So yeah, I think with time, however, and with better teammates, Mualani could surpass any and potentially all the other DPSs, because a lot of her issues do come down to Xiangling and or other teammates missing vapes and stuff. If we can get a pyro character that applies a really, really strong pyro aura that makes vaping consistently possible, Mualani got a huge buff. That will also buff Nevullette. No vape Nevullette is real. It is annoying because if you have C0 Nevullette, you're liable to be knocked around. If you have C1 Nevullette, then he's better than Mualani in every way. Mualani at C0. Mualani at C1 as well. But the gap could close if future Natlan characters synergize really, really well with Mualani, although they will likely synergize with Nevullette as well. So I expect Nevullette to stay the better character, Mualani to be sometimes better, but overall worse. And I could see Mualani surpassing Arlecchino, but for now, I would put Nevullette as, I know in my tier list, I put Arlecchino in tier 0. I think I would take her down to the very top of tier 1, and I'd put Mualani behind her, and then I would put Alhaitham, Chlorand, Hutao, Nilou, and the rest of the good DPSs just below her. So, and then Linny I would put in with those DPSs because for me he is even more cringe, but some people would put Linny even like right on par with Arlecchino, or maybe even above Arlecchino if you love Linny. So that is what I think. Should you pull Mualani? I really would only pull her if you like her. There's really no reason to subject yourself to her annoyances if you don't love the character. If you do love the character, you can feel some pride in the fact that if you do your resets and really commit yourself to learning her mechanics and learning her teammates and doing all that stuff, that you can really pop off and have some of the best clears in the game, because she really can reach very high peaks. It just takes a lot of effort to get to those peaks. So get her if you like her, but don't worry about it if you don't, because either she'll become more comfortable. I expect her to become much more comfortable to play down the road with the Pyro Archon, potentially other supports, and let me know your thoughts. This video took a ton of work, so thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you want to see me continue to subject myself to this torture. I probably spent, I think, more than full work days just testing teams, like probably a good 20 hours testing Mualani teams. So I'm sorry if you're disappointed by the lack of non-Xiangling teams, but Xiangling is just too broken and also too bad. So it's really complicated times in Genshin. Let me know your thoughts. Take care. Bye for now.